thank you very much. For the record, my brilliant thing would be the first 10 minutes of the film Raising Arizona. So someone can write that down and pin it up. Thank you. Sleep Notes by Duncan Macmillan. The list began after her first attempt. Me and Dad were in the car and he was trying to explain why my mother didn't want to live anymore. I remember asking lots of questions because eventually he told me to shut up, turn the radio on and smoked with the window down. At the hospital, Mum saw me and said, "Not him." And so I sat in the corridor next to an old couple who gave me a carton of juice and some chocolate from a machine. Dad was in with her for ages, and then when he came out, he stood with his arms folded whilst the doctor talked to him. He looked at me for a second, then went back to staring at the floor. After a bit, he shook his head and walked away, and the doctor came over and squatted in front of me and told me that Dad was just going to get some fresh air and be back in a minute, even though he wasn't. The doctor smiled at me and asked if I wanted anything, but I said no, because I'd been bought some chocolate and juice from the machine. Although that's when I had the idea. I didn't do anything until later when Mum was back home. In those days, Dad had a room with all his records in, and he'd sit in his big chair and smoke with the windows closed. Usually he'd play the records out loud, but sometimes, especially during this time, he would put his head in between those huge headphones and sit with his eyes closed. Sometimes, if I felt brave, I'd creep in and watch the back of his head. It was around this time that I started the list. I believed that my mum was surrounded by things that would make her really happy, but that she'd stop noticing them. I began to write down everything that was wonderful about the world. After much deliberation, I decided my list should be presented in no particular order. There was no way of saying that, for example, walking barefoot on hot sand was any better than Nina Simone's voice. Also, being only 6, the list was largely composed of things I thought were really good, and not things that my mum would necessarily agree with. Number 1, ice cream. Number 2, staying up past your bedtime and being allowed to watch TV. Number 3, Christmas. 4, people falling over. 5, banana slides. 6, water fights. 7, things with stripes. 8, ladybirds. I kept the list in my pocket and added things as they occurred to me. Eventually, when the list was 8 pages long, and I had 315 things on it, I left it on my mum's pillow, with the title, Every Brilliant Thing. She never mentioned it to me, but I know she read it because she corrected my spelling. I forgot about the list until her second attempt, 10 years later. As a teenager, I dealt with it less well. I wore my heart on my sleeve. I remember the day she came back from the hospital, sitting at the table, staring into space, and saying that she would be dead if it hadn't been for the ham and pineapple pizza lining her stomach from the night before. I remember saying to her, "You took 3 days' worth of antidepressants, a whole blister pack of contraceptive pills, 4 Nurofen, and half a tub of Bismuth tablets. You're probably healthier than I am. If you're going to kill yourself, try jumping off a bridge." And rather than storm off, I sat there and I started to shovel food into my mouth. I'd spent hours on this meal and I was furious that she was just sat there in front of us both, wishing she was dead and letting it go cold. And then the most remarkable thing happened. She laughed. It was such a genuine laugh, and it went on for ages. And after a while, I found myself joining in. It was my dad who got up and walked away, going to his room to listen to his records. That night, I carried on with the list. 316 Kung Fu movies. 317 Weetabix. 318 old bicycles. 319 old people holding hands. 320 burning things. 321 laughing so hard you shoot milk out your nose. 322 making up after an argument. 323 telescopes. 324 roller coasters. For a few weeks, I followed my mother around, reading the list to her. I would leave messages on the answer phone. I would turn off the radio or stand in front of the TV. I spent a long time talking to her back. 516, winning something. 517, starting a new book. The list evolved. It soon became my aim to reach 1,000. I wasn't allowed to cheat, which meant A, no repetition, B, things had to be genuinely wonderful and life-affirming, and C, not too many material items. For a few months, the list became my sole focus. 761, fresh air. 762, gifts that you actually want and didn't have to ask for. By the time summer came round, I was approaching my target. 822, electricity. 823, people who can't sing but either don't know or don't care. Then in one push, 991 construction cranes, 992 the moon, 993 dreams of flying, 994 the rainforest, 995 falling in love, 996 sex, 997 art, 998 chocolate, 999 staying up all night talking, 1000 waking up late with someone.